All right, folks, welcome back to 3 Zen. The next story I have for you that showed up on my memo pad here is a story about the night that we all met down in the Auger Inn at Colonel Vandenberg's request. But before I do, I want to tell you about this little memo pad of mine. I started carrying it so I could write down stories I wanted to tell you because I kept forgetting them. And then as I began this video, I thought to myself, you might want to take pause and write down "buy more Prevagen" on the bottom of this, but be it as it may, it is what it is. Those stories always have a way of coming back and once again walking through my mind, and now I'm ready for them. So, we were in, the story takes place in the spring of 1971. I was still in pilot training. And on a Friday afternoon, we were about to take our Morse code test. I don't know why we had to take it, but we had a test in Morse code. So anyway, we were all gathering around 3 o'clock to take the test when our academic den mother broke into the room and said, "Listen, guys, you can't dally around with this test because Colonel Vandenberg, who was our wing commander, Hoyt S. Vandenberg Jr., I think he was, has called for a all pilots meeting in this one hangar up the base, and it's mandatory." And so we all looked at each other and went, "Huh?" And we began wondering, okay, what was that all about? That was in 1971. The Vietnam War was becoming even more unpopular than it was, and so we were thinking, well, is he going to jerk us out of there, or are they going to announce that we're shutting down the war in Vietnam? Or then we had rumors that perhaps Laughlin or Laredo Air Force Base were going to close as a result of the drawdown of the war that we'd seen so far. So the rumors were flying. We had no idea what it was. Anyway, we all sat down and dutifully put on our headsets and started doing dits and dots and dashes and whatever. And finally got done with it and then mustered over to this hangar. So we walk in this hangar, and it was just crowded. All the classes and the IPs and the staff were in there. And then Colonel Vandenberg drove up in a staff car, got out. They called the hangar, everyone in the hangar to attention, and we all snapped to. He walked in with Vice Wing Commander and 3 squadron commanders behind him, the Squadron 38, Squadron Commander, 37 Squadron Commander, and the Student Squadron Commander. So the 5 of them walk in, and then they had a set of stairs for them to climb up onto this flatbed truck. And there was a single microphone up there. So he walks up to the microphone, and of course we're all standing at attention. He said, "At ease, gentlemen." And he began with, I'm going to have to paraphrase this. I didn't record it. I didn't have a cell phone to hold up. Plus, he'd probably just shoved that cell phone up my ass. Anyway, so he sat there and he said, "Gentlemen," he says, "I am getting sick and tired of Air Training Command pilots being called a bunch of pussies." He says, it's not so. He says, "You deserve better than that. We deserve better than that." And he says, "I'm just not going to put up with that crap anymore." Now, Colonel Vandenberg had been a fighter pilot. He had flown Thuds, F-105s. And I guess he was getting some razzing from some of his buddies being the wing commander of a Air Training Command base. So he continued on. He says, "From now on," he says, "we're going to muster at the Officers Club at 4:30 or 5 o'clock on Fridays, and for the first hour, it's going to be a stag hour." He says, "If your wives or your girlfriends won't let you come, well, that's just too bad." He says, "That's just really too bad." But he says, for the first hour, he says, that's just for the pilots. He says, second of all, he said, beer is going to be 25 cents a bottle for that time, for that hour. Wow, now he's getting our attention. What happened to Laughlin? What happened to Vietnam? Screw it, we don't care. And then he ended by, he said, okay, he says, 4 o'clock now or 4:15, whatever. He says, happy hour begins at 4:30, and I expect to see you there. But before he left, he says, before we leave, I want to take the time here to introduce the wing drinking team. And as if on cue, all 4 of those other guys standing up on that stage, their heads snapped to Colonel Vandenberg like, what? And he says, We hereby challenge any 5 of you that can stand the heat to a beer chugging contest. Well, that's the way this thing started. Oh man, you could just feel the electricity in that room beginning to build. I mean, in those days, we had this thing called esprit de corps, and professionalism was still far down the road along with PC, that crap. Anyway, you could just feel the spirit of being an Air Force pilot beginning to well up in you, and we were very proud of it. So those of us in academics had to go home and change into our flight suits. Back in those days, we couldn't attend academics wearing flight suits. We had to look pretty in one respect. Anyway, so we went home and changed and told our wives, hey, meet us down there at 6:30 or whatever it was. And okay, good. So we got our kitchen passes and headed back to the O Club. So we were going up to Mr. Moss, who was the bartender at that time, and we'd take a dollar bill, and we'd give Moss a dollar bill, and he would hand out 6-packs of Budweiser. And those were in those smaller bottles in those days. So we'd take those 6-packs and put one in this pocket, one in that pocket, one in that pocket, and one in that pocket, and one in each hand, just walking around drinking beer. It was one hell of an evening. Then Colonel Vandenberg and the wing drinking team lined up, and they went through classes in order of seniority. So the senior class, they beat them. They beat the second class. They beat the third class. I think our class was the 5th class that they took on or something like that. And I don't remember if we beat them or not. It doesn't matter. The atmosphere down there was just electric. And something else that was really kind of interesting, as the evening progressed, the beer bottles began hitting the floor before guys were finished. And it wasn't long before there was an inch or so of beer on the floor of the auger end. And it was just wild. It was crazy wild down there that night. And then when I got home, we all went back. There were 4 of us that lived in the Gold Talent apartments. Dave Vickery, myself, Fred Drake, and Jim Grizzard. So we all go back, and we felt to kind of dampen the pain, let's invite the wives to go to the movies. It seemed like the thing to do. So we did, and they had no idea what had transpired. So we all met downstairs and went to the back to the base and went to the movies that night. That was wild. But anyway, the next morning, Monday morning when I got up, I found a deep cut in one of my boots, glass cut. Apparently I had stepped on a beer bottle or something like that. And I wore those boots until they just virtually wore out because I just loved seeing that cut in there. Reminded me of that night. The auger end, I think, I've been down there here in the last couple of years, and I think it's dead. But anyway, that was the night Colonel Vandenberg invited us down there to kind of impress upon us what Air Force pilots were really all about, at least back in that day. As an end note here, when I was stationed down in Australia, I had the opportunity to run into General Vandenberg at that time and went up and introduced myself and reminded him of that night. He just sat there and laughed, and it was a good night. We had a lot of fun that night. So good to see everyone, and we'll be talking to you again soon.